It's part 2 of our British Singer-Songwriters episode, back again with Tom Haigh. Tom was previously our David Bowie expert in part 1, which was out last week. This time, he's opining about Nick Drake, who he's also made a 5-track playlist for, to argue that he's underrated. Bit easier to make a playlist from Nick Drake's output, definitely not as much as Bowie. If sad, folky good times are your thing, well, listen on, enjoy, see you at the end.
Oh, hang on. Yeah, what are we calling this podcast?
Was it over underrated?
Over underrated. Sous-évalué. Överschätzt. Överunderskattad. Over underrated.
So welcome back to part 2, and we are now talking about Tom's underrated artist. Tom, take it away.
Yeah, so the artist that I believe to be underrated is Nick Drake. I think people who know him love him, but he's not widely known. You didn't know about him, did you, Barbara?
I knew the name, but I'd never knowingly heard a song of his before today.
He was absolutely a commercial flop during his sadly short lifetime, but his profile has grown quite substantially over the last sort of 20-25 years. There was a famous US car advert that featured one of his songs that built up a sort of US following for him. Brad Pitt presented a BBC radio documentary on him, and I think at the time, some 15 years or so ago, Heath Ledger was interested in starring in a biography of him. So it's not completely obscure, but he's certainly not well known, and so that's why I think he's underrated. Because I think a lot more people should know his music, really, and I'd like to hope that they will continue to encounter it. It's only 3 albums. It's quite a limited output, so it's not as intimidating as some people's back catalogue as well, in terms of where to start and how much time it will take to wade through it.
Can I ask how you discovered him? Do you remember?
My dad was very into him. Had all 3 of his albums, like not original presses, but was aware of him at the time because my dad was very into folk music, and he's kind of like a folk figure, Nick Drake, or certainly a acoustic singer-songwriter. So yeah, my dad, I think just my dad's records ultimately. He had all 3 of them. I stole them when I went off to university, and I think I otherwise wouldn't have come across him. Yeah, there isn't much to go on if you want to go off and find him yourself. There's no video footage of him. There's a handful of promotional images. He was part of the reason why his profile is low, and sadly is also his life was tragically short, is that he was a cripplingly shy performer, very very sort of interior and not very well suited to performing, especially on as a lone sort of focus for the audience. And his music, he used a lot of very complicated tunings on his guitar, so it took a lot of time in between songs to retune his guitar. So there was just often, so I've read, these very long and painful silences as he retuned his guitar. So he wasn't much of a showman. And at the time, he was competing against a lot of charismatic, British male singer-songwriters, Cat Stevens. David Bowie at the time was into his folk phase, so he was probably competing on the same bills and in the same field. Mark Bolan as well, and Tyrannosaurus Rex. So I think he was just very temperamentally ill-suited to the work that he tried to do, unfortunately, at least in terms of performing. I certainly think he was an excellent musician, whose music deserves to be more widely known, as I said.
Yeah, I kind of think I don't know, I discovered him maybe in the late 90s, early noughties. I feel like every decade there's an article in Uncut or Mojo or something, and it gives him a new lease of life to it. So I discovered him maybe in the early noughties, and I remember using naughty online pirate sites, you could download it.
When you said naughty, it made me think of pornography. So I just imagined
there was
Drake Hub.
Weirdly, for a guy who doesn't do a lot of marketing, he did a lot of porn pictures.
It's got a lovely face.
Yeah,
it's got a lovely face,
the real meaning of Pink Moon. And then I think it was like reading like one of those like uncut magazines, because I used to buy a lot of music magazines, and like it was like, oh, have you heard Nick Drake? And I think I heard a track you've got on here, and I remember being spellbound at how great it was. And I think it's one of those cases when his best song was the first song I heard. So whilst hearing it, I was like, oh my god, I found my new favourite artist. And unfortunately, I had hit the peak too early. I worked around a lot of music fans, and I think like talking to people, everyone has their Nick Drake moment. They sort of discover him for like a week and get into Nick Drake. I think a lot of music fans at one point seem to sort of find their way there. I guess because he gets mentioned by so many different artists. So eventually you think, oh, okay, maybe I should give him a go because he's been mentioned by Tom York or whoever.
Yeah.
So I'd say, so I have heard, I think, all three albums, I think, by now. I assume there's like some rarities. I think there's like some undiscovered songs and things, but I've not heard
they did a collection of sort of half finished songs and sort of private recordings that the family, I think it's called Family Tree actually. So I got that, and before that there'd been a lot of bootlegs. A lot of the official recordings that were released on this Family Tree sound like bootlegs anyway. They're not great quality songs, but it's just nice when there's so little material to have a little bit more, and he's very enigmatic as a result of this.
I feel aside from, because I guess in the early 70s, like sound wise, it's hard to have a great amp. So if he's going to be playing in a pub and he's got like a crappy on around amp at all, and he's got no personality, like people just aren't going to listen, are they? Like he needs to be playing somewhere where everyone wants to listen to him, and he never got given that. Which I think is why he kept quitting music, because he was told by people that he was a genius, and then he like performed to people talking all over him, and it just destroyed him, didn't it? So it's rather sad that he never saw his own fame.
Mm-hmm. You hear it in the music as well. There's a sort of sagging quality of the sort of mood. And Pink Moon, his final album, is so bleak. It's beautiful, but it's bleak, much bleaker than the previous two albums, because you see there's just like a balloon steadily letting air out, which I think adds to the sort of pathos of his music to me. You see him failing, even though the music shouldn't fail, he's failing.
Yeah, I can't remember what order. So like, early on, was there a lot more strings and a lot more majesty to his work? Then later on, was it more stripped down?
I think it's actually the second album, Brighter Later, had a lot of strings and sort of swelling instruments because of the producer that he brought on board, and supposedly Nick Drake didn't like that and moved away from that. But also the songs that he produced for his final album, Pink Moon, which is also extremely short, it's barely, I'm not even sure it's half an hour, it's like 28 minutes or something like that, were indicative of his mood as well, and it's sort of like, they sound quite raw. So they might be as much that rather than even with strings, they might have still sounded quite sort of, bleak and spare. But the first album is there's cellos, and in fact there's a song called The Cello Song, and there's a bit more sort of optimism in the music, I think. But as I say, I almost find that it's all bound up together, and I find the bleakness of Pink Moon quite beautiful and moving in because of that and because of the context.
Yeah, I guess the first album had all the optimism. He didn't know if it was going to be a hit or not, and by Pink Moon, his wind had been taken out. And also, I found out that John Cale played on the second album, which is a surprise.
Yeah. I think he knew that the producer was American, Joe Boyd, and I wonder if that's the connection there, John Cale, because like you said, there a lot of people were lauding Nick Drake, and he had some good connections. It's like John Martin went on to become a much more successful folk musician, and he had a close relationship with Nick Drake. He wrote a song called Solid Air about Nick Drake, and him and his wife was sort of quite protective of him. But it's a very sad story. He possibly had existing and separate mental health issues, but I think his lack of success really ate away at him. He'd failed to build on his sort of musical promise, and moved back home to Warwickshire, with his parents, and then there's some doubt as to whether he took a deliberate or accidental overdose of sleeping pills. But yeah, he was found dead. My housemate and I, Barbara and I, went to the University of Warwick, and my housemate and I visited Nick Drake's grave, which was only sort of like 45 minutes away. It's very simple, but there was a lot of plectrums and little sort of tidbits and stuff. And actually, there was another couple, another set of people visiting the grave, which made it suddenly it put us off a little bit. It made it seem a bit hokey, but it's a pilgrimage site definitely for fans.
Having been to Père Lachaise, where Jim Morrison is and other people, I can imagine that.
Well, we talked about a lot of dead people. Say Babs.
Well, that's apt because this is with Nick Drake. He was someone I had heard of. I don't know when I heard of him. I don't know if it was when we were at uni together, Tom, because I think I only found out recently that you and Owen went to his grave while we were at university. So yeah, that was interesting. But I knew him as this cult folk musician in a doomed romantic style like Ian Curtis, or I felt maybe lazily like Jeff Buckley, as previously mentioned. Jeff Buckley only had one album, right? Even if there is a lot of live recordings. And I can definitely get on board with liking musicians like that, right? There is something very romantic and kind of, you're alive and they're dead, and you can listen to it. But I think because it was folk, which is really not my kind of genre, I'd never really bothered to check anything out. But I'm really glad that he got picked, because he's such an interesting person, because he clearly was, a bit of a genius. Reading about how obsessive he was about practicing his guitar technique and the tuning, as you mentioned, Tom. And it's just so sad how just clearly his mental health impacted his music. It made me think of the film Frank. Have you guys seen it? Have you seen it, Tom?
So, no.
So Frank is the film with Michael Fassbender where he has a big paper mache head.
Oh, about Frank Sidebottom. Yes.
Yeah,
I haven't seen it, but I know the character. So
in that film, there's this big debate because, Donald Gleason, who's playing the John Munson character, he's kind of like, it is because he's crazy that he's good. And there's this kind of scene towards the end where it's like, no, actually, like, if I didn't have these problems, it would make life so much easier. And it just seems to me so obvious that with, reading about Nick Drake's life, that, this was the late 60s, early 70s. People didn't talk about mental health in that way. And I think if people did talk about mental health, it would be kind of like crazy people, like maybe schizophrenic people or hysterical people smashing things up. I think depression was something else. And I do wonder how much kind of smoking all the dope that he clearly did.
Yeah, definitely.
Can't have helped. Yeah.
I think he struggled to. I think he struggled socially as well. I think he struggled to articulate himself. There's a lyric that really sticks with me. I can't remember if it is in one of the songs that I've selected, but it basically, the lyric is, if songs were lines in a conversation, the situation would be fine. And that sort of almost seems to like sum him up to me. And I think to some other people, it's kind of like he could always express himself in music, but he just couldn't translate that to normal life almost.
Yeah.
And saying that, I mean, like, if he did become mega famous, that could be even worse for him, couldn't it, really?
Yeah, it could have down the Craig Nichols, The Blinds route, right, that we talked about, Fran. I found it very interesting to read about his non-sexuality as well, because was he asexual? Was he secretly gay? Because from reading about, the little I read about it, obviously, Tom, more, it's kind of like he had relationships, but they weren't consummated. And was that social anxiety? Was that, a slight effect of depression? And because he was also on meds, and I was reading about how he was kind of quite ashamed to be talking about them, which, again, so understandable, especially in that time. And I know that those kinds of meds sometimes can have a very negative effect on your libido, but I'm like, oh my God, he must have been like one frustrated man, whatever was going on, right? So, yeah.
Does he mention like love or anything in his lyrics at all?
Well, he writes, his songs are often about women, I think, you know, they're not sexual, but they are romantic, and the object of that romance is female. You know, I picked two songs, Hazy Jane 1 and Hazy Jane 2, and like, you know, it seems to idealize female characteristics. So I don't know if like that seems like the most obvious suggestion, Barbara, that he just, you know, either was unable, you know, to have sexual desire even though he had romantic interest, or I don't know. Yeah, he was an asexual man, and you know that might have. It's interesting because at that point in time, getting into being a musician, you're kind of seeking a type kind of lifestyle as well, aren't you?
Yeah.
Like, you know, and he went to, I think, Marrakesh with the Rolling Stones, and there's sort of details about how he definitely sought out the lifestyle of a musician. He was sort of chasing that above other options. You know, he was a bright guy. He was at Cambridge and stuff. He could have, you know, chosen a different path that he was more temperamentally suited to. So it's a really interesting. He's such an enigmatic figure, and there's just so little to beyond his music to kind of to piece it together.
Joe Boyd did say apparently that his lyrics had a virginal quality, which is quite interesting. I think, you know, having seen this, it then surprised me. So when Boyd came back to England for them to work on a fourth album, apparently he wrote in his autobiography that Drake said, like, "You told me I was a genius. Why am I not famous and rich?" And I'm just like, that's kind of surprising that someone, I guess, so sensitive would be like, I don't know. It felt at odds with, you know, now the kind of music that I listen to. Like, I can understand wanting to make a career out of it and wanting to be a musician and to be able to make money, because I was reading about kind of the retainers that he had from Ireland, and at one point he couldn't afford shoes and stuff like that. But to be so focused on the fame, it surprised me for someone who, you know, was writing about women and nature and shit, basically.
His sister was a relatively famous actress, Gabrielle Drake. She was in a fairly long running sitcom, not sitcom, a soap opera, I think, and yeah, achieved a certain level of fame in a similar field. So yeah, it doesn't quite tally, as you say. It's sort of, you know, it seems like he was seeking out something that, yeah, he was just so temperamentally ill suited to, but he certainly was, you know, a very talented musician and a very talented you know, lyricist, I think.
Maybe if he was in a band, it would have helped him a little bit, because he could have been like the creative person and had a front man. But you know,
yeah, exactly. Not to just be the pure focal point of something.
But would he have ceded control? Who knows?
But it could be like for Johnny Greenwood kind of person, you know, for genius at the back kind of thing, you know. But he has a great voice. That's the problem, isn't he? He's got that beautiful voice.
But yeah, so I will finish with two facts that I enjoyed. So I didn't know that "Life in a Northern Town" by Dream Academy was written for and dedicated to him, because I was just looking at the lyrics. I'm like, what? How? I don't know, but sure, fine. And I did not know that The Cure got their name from a Nick Drake lyric, "A troubled cure for a troubled mind," from Time Has Told Me. So
no, I didn't know that was the reference.
Apparently
there.
So.
Interesting.
Apparently so. But yeah, let's we've talked a lot about his life, but definitely his life is a reason to like him, you know, his enigmaticness, as we've said. But let's get into the music. What's your first pick, Tom?
So well, you've just referenced it. It's called "One of These Things First." It's off his second album, "Brighter Later," which is far and away my favorite. I love that album. Again, you know, as a whole and without exception, like I just think it's the most complete and most musically satisfying album. I love how lush and swelling the orchestral arrangements are on it. I think they really enhance his music. It's interesting that it's apparently the very opposite of what Nick Drake thought about it. Yeah, and this is just a really lovely song, I think. "One of These Things First." Yeah, and you know, not to overuse the word enigmatic, but I think, you know, the lyrics immediately sort of conjure it's a beautiful song, but it's kind of, if you listen and think about the lyrics, it's quite troubling. He seems quite sort of wistful about being all these, being something else, and he seems more interested in that than the life that he's living at that. I think.
Yeah, I knew this track. Obviously, it has a lot more piano than you always think of Nick being a virtuoso, sort of like almost classical guitar player. But yeah, the piano's front and center with some light percussion. But you have to listen hard to hear the picked guitar in the background. But I love the way that the piano sort of like the piano interludes after the vocals. Lyrically, I couldn't tell if it had any depth or if he was just saying lyrics to fill the music. But some people say that he heard the song for Temps, the way you do the things you do, and he just changed their lyrics to his lyrics. That's what he did for the whole song. So I don't know if there's much depth for. He just thought, that sounds like an idea. But yeah, this has always been one of my favourites. And having a quick look, I think that this would probably be my favourite album because all the songs I like seem to be from this album.
Yeah.
I looked up why it's called Brighter Later, and apparently it's to do with the RP accent that people on BBC Radio used to do. So it's meant to be brighter later. The weather is going to be brighter later, but it's brighter later, which makes me think, okay, he had a sense of humour, even though he's writing about quite bleak things. Yeah, for me, actually, the lyrics, immediately I was like, it's longing for the grass being greener on the other side. It's kind of like, I would rather be literally anybody, anything than myself, which is, quite beautiful but bleak, which I'm guessing is the theme here. Yeah, I really like this song. I think in part because I also wasn't expecting piano at all. Like, not being a folky gal myself, I did think it was going to be, 5 acoustic guitar ballads, and it's really not. I like how the piano accompanies the guitar and the bass as well. And because I didn't know him, I hadn't heard his voice. Lovely voice, just a little bit hoarse again, which kind of adds to that vulnerability of just like, it's not kind of perfect and shiny, which goes very well. And I really, really like the melody line that he's singing. There's another song as well where I'm just like, wow, it's not at all what you'd expect from a folky song, and it is very much its own instrument. So yeah, despite it not really being normally my kind of thing, by the third listen, I'd saved it. So yeah, I think a very solid opener.
I think it's underrated how beautiful his voice is as well. I've kind of, waxed lyrical about the arrangements and the sort of, the playing and stuff. But yeah, his voice is really beautiful. Apparently he was a very tall man. I think I remember reading.
Almost 7 foot, someone wrote, I think, yeah.
A lot of things didn't kind of fit together, that this big, tall, kind of awkward, gangly guy would bumble on stage and be hunched over his guitar for ages, sort of tuning it, but then produce this really fragile and sort of hauntingly, sort of beautiful voice. Again, it just adds to the mystique that surrounds him.
I guess that's one bonus point, because obviously Jeff Buckley had a lot of imitators, but I can't really hear this voice since, really. It's kind of unique, isn't it?
Yeah, no, definitely. No one's been able to kind of
capture that sort of. But yeah, that's always a bonus for me.
And folk probably doesn't do justice to certainly this album. Like, it doesn't sound, because of the orchestral accompaniment, it doesn't sound folky, but it was in the middle of that moment where there was a lot of singer-songwriters with guitars. That might be one of the reasons why he wasn't in a band. It was the style at the time, the sort of fashion at the time was to be a
Stevens.
Yeah, exactly.
Tom, what's your second pick?
It is a song also from, I've been calling it Brighter Later all these years. I was quite shocked to hear Brighter Later. No, I was just like, that's embarrassing. It's called Hazy Jane 1, the first Hazy Jane. And yes, it's just, I'm in danger of probably repeating the same sentiment here about why I like all these songs, because they're very much of a kind. In comparison, I think one of the animating sort of qualities that when I was picking the Bowie playlist was to make it as different musically as I possibly could. A lot of the songs I picked for Nick Drake are quite similar in style, and this is, again, it's lush, it's sort of pastoral. I find that the album, and this song especially, conjures a image of sort of British English countryside and a particular era of that, kind of green and pleasant land almost. That's where the music takes me. And these songs, this song and its second part, which we'll get onto, really just transports me there.
Yeah, so this was a song that I first downloaded, and this became my Winamp. Is that a phrase you remember?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is my Winamp
Yeah.
regular, and I remember showing this on MSN a lot at the time.
I was going to say, is this the song you used to woo the girls with?
Oh yeah, I would say, hey, have you heard of Nick Drake? Check this out.
Hey, Hazy Jemima, Hazy,
Yeah, I mean, imagine meeting two people called Hazy Jane. It's unbelievable. but yeah, the strings and guitar sound brilliant together. I kind of think of, Watership Down before the bad. When it's all like with rabbits and a beautiful English sunshine.
Yeah, about to be ruined.
Brutalized. Yeah, I guess it's about losing somebody to substance. I don't know if that's the lyrics. As I kind of thought, Hazy Jane. Haze is a brilliant word. I don't use it enough. Yeah, if you want to discover Nick Drake, pop on this, and if you don't like it, then he ain't for you. But for me, this is pure. This is what he's all about, and it's a shame that I have not found anything as good as this since.
I actually prefer One of These Things First to Hazy Jane 1, I have to say. So this song from the beginning, I was like, oh, the guitar technique here is amazing. Like what he's playing, I guess the only thing I can think of is like Eric Clapton with Slow Hand, right? Where it's like, it's slow, but it's clearly intricate and very difficult to play. It reminds me of a bit of Scott Walker with the strings, although the voice, very different. But yeah, I think Scott Walker is maybe another kind of, musician's favorite, kind of not comedians, but musicians. Alongside the strings and the interesting guitar technique, I really like the percussion because I read that it almost sounds like djembe or something. It sounds like a drum sound that isn't, for me, very familiar in traditional Western music. So I don't know what it is, but I like it. So we've talked about the first of the Hazy Janes.
Yes.
What's the second one all about?
I did think, God, can I pick them both? That's a little bit repetitive, but then I thought they dovetail so nicely because it's a very different song, Hazy Jane 2. There's not a lot to connect them musically. I guess there's just the character of Jane, but that's what I found very interesting because I'm trying to sort of I spent a lot of time trying to construct in my head, flesh out the narrative of this character, and again connect it up with the mythology about Nick Drake, and kind of try and connect that to the images that the music conjures in my mind. Because again, it's just a very beautiful, sad nostalgia that it conjures, but a beautiful nostalgia. And I didn't live through the same time period, so I don't know how he's making me nostalgic for something that I didn't live through. I think that's what I find very affecting about this album, especially. It kind of it makes me pine for something that I see in connection with this music.
Yeah, I was surprised how different it was to the other Hazy Jane. This I can kind of hear where Belle and Sebastian kind of like borrow a lot of them sounds from this track. It's got a faster lyrical verses, a little bit of horns, some rhythmic, joyous guitars. It's like the brighter side of cannabis, more depressing, paranoid cannabis. And again, it's to be a great track to dance at a sunny festival, and it's sad that he never got to play.
It's sort of the peak again. It's like it's the crest of as optimistic as he sounds, isn't it? I think, and that brings its own sort of pathos because you know where it's going. You know where
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, but Babs, were you a fan of the second Hazy Jane?
So when it started, I thought, oh no, this is what I thought all songs would be like, because it was very like guitar-y. But when he starts singing, and when there's something, I don't know if it's brass, but there's a kind of alarm backing, it goes in and out. It improved massively. And here, like with one of these things first, the melody line of his singing is so unexpected, and again takes you on a journey. So it just emphasized to me that this is not just one man and his guitar. And the guitar that he is using is good, but I think I sometimes get quite bored by music that's just that. And that's when I read about how this album has Fairport Convention, John Cale, and Beach Boys session musicians Mike Kowalski and Ed Carter, because apparently he wanted it to sound like Pet Sound. So I don't like the jingly jangly guitars and the bass when he's not singing, but when he's singing, thumbs up.
There's a really interesting sort of side story about like whether or not orchestral scores are welcome on certain albums. Like I know for Let It Be is a very controversial Beatles album because of the orchestral, all the strings and stuff that Phil Spector, who wasn't obviously Beatles' regular producer, stuck on that. And Pet Sounds is kind of like was the technical high point of like 60s studio productions, and understandably this is still only like 4 or 5 years maybe on from that, so it's still a reference point. And you forget as well that reputations of albums grow over time, don't they? So while people can have an initial reaction, it's also something continues to be and possibly grows more influential over time as its reputation grows, and as you see how kind of like pioneering it's become. So I wonder if Nick Drake felt that he needed something that in the end he didn't like in this sort of Joe Boyd orchestral.
But he's also shooting himself in the foot because like both bands, the Beach Boys and the Beatles, couldn't tour those albums.
Exactly.
So he's making this album, only going to them live, and it's all gone. Like he won't have the horns, he won't have the strings. He can't produce it the same. So people are going to be kind of cheated. So I guess you can do that once you've got a big fan base and you can afford to have Sesame musicians on tour. But if it's just him in a tiny venue, it's not going to be the same song, is it? If you're a fan
you need to find a way to adapt it to just one man, one guitar, which would be possible, I guess, but you'd still need
these days you can have loops and you can have it on a computer, but back in 1970 it'd just be him and a guitar, isn't it, really? So oh well.
Yeah.
Hey, podcast lovers! Now available, a new podcast experience featuring exclusive miniseries like Food Faves, and all new series that takes a fun look at everyone's real first true love, food. Milky Way Marvels, a lighthearted astronomy series where we explore the fascinating wonders of our galaxy. Pop culture icons, an entertaining, nostalgic look back at various nouns in popular culture, plus more. Relax, enjoy, listen, laugh, and maybe even learn. Podcast, presented by Sonic Embassy. Now streaming everywhere you listen.
Access quick links to your favorite places to listen now at solo.to/Sonic Embassy.
Underrated.
So what's your next pick, Tom?
My next pick is the song Saturday Sun, which is from his first debut album, 5 Leaves Left. I knew I needed a track from his first album. I decided not to go chronologically. I thought that was too basic, and I don't like, as I've said, as much of the two, the first and third album as I do of Brighter Later. So I'll have to get used to calling it now.
I've got Daft Punk in my head. Brighter, Later, Harder, Faster for some reason.
That is a cover I would like to see.
But I had a spin through 5 Leaves Left to remind myself of the particular song that I like the most. There's a couple of so the Riverman and Cello Song are from these albums and are relatively more well known, and I didn't want to stray into I feel like I've picked a well known Nick Drake song coming up next. So I remembered that I always have a really fond reaction to Saturday Sun, and it's sort of like a sad and slow song that somehow makes me feel again that sort of there's a sort of more optimistic tone coming through from an artist that I associate more with a bleak kind of, sadness. And I just like the contrast between the pace of that music. It's got like a slow percussive arrangement that I think gives it a really nice atmosphere.
Yeah, Saturday Sun is kind of what I think I heard after I enjoyed Hazy Jane. Yeah, it's easy to not notice, I think, if you're listening to a lot of songs. It's a more soulful side to Nick Drake, I think, than others. But it's kind of, for me, it maybe meanders down to the lounge room, sort of like, guy gets in a jazz cafe, playing some nice music, which he kind of like, but you're not going to go over and buy the CD. And that's what I find some of Nick Drake's work can be. So he does have these lush, beautiful arrangements, then some of it is just a bit, that's happening. That's nice. And that's why I think I stood back from Nick Drake. But yeah, Babs, what's your thoughts?
Well, I broadly agree with you, Fran. I'm afraid to say, Tom. So yeah, this is a jazzier folk, and that's two genres that I don't particularly like. Normally, I found this. I wrote exactly that, music or lift music. For me, I found it quite uninspiring, actually. Just, I think in part because it is a very low song, and when I was like, okay, but maybe there's something in the lyrics. I found something in the lyrics from other songs, but I don't really know what this is about. He says, Saturday sun brought people and faces that didn't see much in their day, but when I remembered those people and places, they were really too good in their way. And I was like, right, what's happening? Like, yeah, so that also just meant that I was like, yeah, this is not gelling with me. But yeah, I mean, you were saying, Tom, that you kind of have memories associated with this song, right? So maybe that's why.
I think Nick Drake especially, but sort of music, for me more broadly, is about creating atmospheres. And then in that atmosphere, there's other elements that I kind of connect to. And it would be very reductionist just to sort of keep circling everything back and reading, into every lyric that he writes some kind of like deeper connection to his story, because that's not how lyrics work, and art isn't always sort of reflective of the bigger narrative of the artist. But I just there's always this like kind of, not, I don't want to say wallowing, but maybe wallowing is the best word. Like there's just this nostalgia that it evokes in me. I just find it very, there's a very kind of like rich draw in the atmosphere that his music creates, which perhaps is just me buying into the mythology of Nick Drake, the doomed artist. I don't know. Just
to say, I was looking for the word, I couldn't remember it. There is a word for a nostalgia for a time that you've never experienced, which is anemonia. Anemoia is right. That word. So I think that is what he's creating for you there.
yeah, definitely. Because and then I start to visualize him as this kind of outsidery flaneur kind of guy, just watching the world and being so apart from it, but he's so interested in it, and he wants to. He finds it beautiful and he wants to detail it, but he can't participate in it. He can only participate in it through describing it in his music. So I think I'm kind of almost a little bit spellbound by that image I have of him, and nothing exists to dissuade me of that apart from the music, which I'm so won over by, that it's kind of like a sort of I'm trapped in and I
love it. You're trapped. Nick Drake has trapped you in a world that you never knew. Like sounds like a horror film.
I just luxuriate in it. I really do. I find the atmosphere so warm, and even as we're going to get onto, even when it gets bleak, it's still beautiful to me. Even though like this, I find a lot more kind of like. Yes, the Saturday Sun. I don't know. It's not even a concept that I think of as something that I'm familiar with, but it fits the atmosphere that I enjoy about this song.
I can imagine him having a an American fan base, because I know there's a lot of people who like that kind of like cliche English gentleman down on his luck, but you know.
Well, it was Napster that spread his music.
Was it?
Yeah.
And I'm also surprised I've not really heard his songs in like media more, like
Yeah.
films.
Apart from the next one, right? But yeah.
They would fit so many like opening credits to a film or a TV show, or so it's interesting.
I had heard when I was reading more about Nick Drake many years ago, so it might be either outdated or slightly misremembered. I think the family used to be quite picky and choosy about what they would license for and how his music could be used. I don't know if that's influenced that, but most estates now have got kind of a long distance relationship to that, and they kind of don't want to manage it. They just want the cash to roll in. That's why all these artists have sold their back catalogs, isn't it? Including Bowie and Dylan and Springsteen, all the rest of them.
Yeah, I think I really resonate with what you're saying about luxuriating in an atmosphere that's created, and I think possibly all of us here, we do like to listen to depressing music to feel better. But I think with Saturday Sun in particular, I think it is just the genre that leaves me cold. I was like, this is not. I need to be more alienated. I need less double bass and piano to want to luxuriate in that world.
So, what's your final pick, Tom?
My final pick is Pink Moon, the title track of his final, as alluded to earlier, very bleak and spare album, but possibly as a result of this relatively famous Volkswagen American advert, possibly his most famous track.
On Spotify listens, yes.
It's definitely the one that got his profile raised in America, especially. It's a song that I always it's very basic, but if I notice the moon on a particular day, I find myself singing it in my head. I think it's the one truly purely beautiful moment on this last album. The rest of which I find becomes increasingly quite hard to listen to, because it's just getting so bleak. Again, for want of another suitable synonym, but I think. Pink Moon becomes quite hard to listen to. I don't know if that's an opinion shared by other Nick Drake fans, but it's just pared down to the absolute basics. And actually the playing is quite, not clumsy, but sounds underproduced in other songs. Whereas this one, it's quite slight. I think it's just under 2 minutes or around that mark, but it feels the most professionally produced of that album. Whereas the rest of it, becomes just, so bare bones.
How do you change producers for this album?
He definitely didn't use Joe Boyd, I don't think, or he might even have just turned up. I have a vague recollection of reading a story that he just turned up with a load of his demos and just dropped them off. So it might
John
even
Wood
have been...
apparently was the producer who worked with Fairport Convention, John Martin, Cat Stevens, etc. Yeah,
this is definitely like a pretty folky song, and I've heard it so many times. I never really understood why it was his most. I guess because of the advert, but it's also a strange choice for the advert. Out of all the songs I would have chosen to choose for an advert, I may not necessarily have chosen Pink Moon. I've got a feeling that I must have heard a lot of this album when I was trying to get into it, and I got put off. So I think maybe it's just the mid-era Nick Drake is where I find the love. But this is fine. Also, do you know Sugar Man, that American artist?
Yeah.
In the documentary, there's a lot of links to the same sort of similar sounds. Although I guess they never heard each other. But if you didn't know about better, you think that Rodriguez had maybe copied some of the arrangements, because it's the strings and the guitars. But then he didn't say anything, so maybe it's just coincidence.
Not at the beginning, right? Many years later.
Yeah, but I think Rodriguez, his albums were like early 70s as well. So, like I said, there's a lot of people, a lot of singer-songwriters in the post Bob Dylan era, isn't there really? And what's even weird is that Nick Drake's younger than my dad. it seems so long ago. But you think,
Yeah.
he would be like a year younger from my dad. So it's like, well, he was so young when he passed away.
Yeah, that's I think possibly why also my dad was so aware of him and so into him. He was like a direct contemporary. So yeah, I think it's just very sad that his there's obviously the wasted musical potential, but it's one of those, like I think you mentioned earlier, Barbara. There's that kind of self-reinforcing doomed artist myth, isn't there? Which kind of like inflates and I think I definitely have fallen a little bit victim here in relation.
One way or another.
It's kind of hard to extricate the musician in this case from it, in the same way, like some of the people you mentioned earlier, Ian Curtis and stuff, they must be more romantic figures as a result of the wider story and how the music fits and feeds that narrative, I think.
It'd be interesting to meet someone who's never heard of him and don't mention that he's passed away, and to see what they think of the music, not knowing the context.
Well, I guess that the fact that this was used on a Volkswagen commercial means that a lot of people came across it like that, right? In a very in a very commercial way, different to his other songs. So yeah, can I mention again the album cover here, guys? Because there's a tooth with a face. What is going on? Like that was such a weird album cover. You think like contemplative and nature. I looked at it and I was like, this seems again like it's another fever dream. Well, no, I think it's like Salvador Dali, but on Microsoft Paint this time is what I would say. But anyway, I like this better than Saturday Sun. I found it intriguing how his voice sounds quite innocent and childlike here, more than previously, which is surprising given that it's a later album. But when you read about kind of like how he made it and how difficult it must have been, I don't know, maybe that, but it's just, it was more real.
He was really struggling by this point. I think that's
it seems it.
Yeah, it's clear in the nature of the music, but I think it was also that he didn't have any energy left to really make the songs all they could be. I think he kind of just turned out what he could, and he didn't like, from memory, I think it was some time passed between him recording these tracks and dying, but he just seemed like he had
given it his all.
Yeah, exactly. So actually, when you think about it, what else he had to give musically, he might have been more like a sort of Syd Barrett figure, in that he could have just lived a sort of a different life for a period of time, never really producing anything else musically, because it does feel like this is the end of the line for someone, to me, the album as a whole.
I found it it made me kind of smile that you were both saying like this song is so bleak, this album is so bleak, because actually that's not how it came across to me. Like I didn't look at the lyrics particularly closely for this one, but I think the fact that the song is so short and ends quite suddenly actually made me want to go back to it. So maybe it's because I've only listened to this song out of context of the rest of the album. Yeah, maybe if it is for kind of one note, feel about it differently. But yeah, it took me a few listens to get my hand around it. And I think, sometimes songs like that finish suddenly, you're like, no, but I want more. So you go back to it. So I very easily went back to it. But yeah, it was kind of incredible looking at the stats from so this song was featured in an advert in 1999. So it took his album sales from 6,000 copies to 74,000 the next year in 2000. And there were some interesting quotes from American newspapers. So the LA Times saw it as an example of how, following the consolidation of US radio stations, previously unknown music was finding audiences through advertising, basically. And there's a nice quote from The Atlantic which said, "The chronic shyness and mental illness that made it hard for Drake to compete with 1970s showmen like Elton John and David Bowie didn't matter when his songs were being pulled one by one out of the ether and played late at night in a dorm room." Yes, 100%. Like, this is college radio fodder. Supreme, but that didn't exist in the same way at the time. So yeah, I guess ahead of his time in a lot of ways.
No, definitely. Yeah, I think he operated in a time where he had to tour and spread the word about his music, and he just couldn't do it. So I think he kind of knew he was he was done at this point. But yeah, I should stop talking more about Pink Moon, the album, because I say, as you've sort of rightly picked up on, this title track is not that bleak. It's actually quite a beautiful, contained little song that I think, yeah, it sort of stands as the high point of this album, which sort of gradually becomes, a sort of, a very tragic kind of end of his career. But yeah, it deserves, I think, to be the gateway to people, for Nick Drake, because yeah, you can move around his catalog, and yeah, I think this is almost would have fitted better on Brighter Latte rather than the album it's ended up on, actually.
I guess we don't know when he wrote it. I mean, could he have written this during those sessions and just had it left over, or?
Yeah, quite possibly. I think the turnaround times are quite close, aren't they? The albums, there's not a huge amount of time between each of them, so yeah.
It's also crazy when you look at these old record deals, because these days he would have been dropped after the first album, wouldn't he? It's amazing.
The fact that he had a retainer.
Yeah. I was like, wow. Three albums, even though he sold like 5,000. So at least he had 3 albums. And most artists these days would have been dropped after that first album. So at least back in those days, they gave people more of a chance to become a best-selling album artist, even.
I think Island were quite a progressive label as well at the time. I think they had a reputation for being quite, supportive and, pioneering across quite a few different genres. So I guess
like reggae.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to sort of be quite bold to do that, because you're not working with established. If you're creating a genre as or sort of like moving into a new genre, you have to kind of do a lot of stuff based on faith that it will work out. And like you were saying earlier, Barbara, I think a lot of people just were won over by the musical genius that they thought Nick Drake to be. But one that needed to be, I don't know, kind of like, either parachuted into a different era, I guess, or kind of
given a team to manage stuff for him.
Yeah.
Because I found the quote. So it was Ashley Hutchings, the bass player with Flair Pop Convention, said he was impressed by Drake's guitar skill, but even more so by his image. He said he looked like a star. He looked wonderful. He seemed to be 7 foot tall. And it's like, yeah, that, on a fellow musician, that's the impression that he made. So the makings were there, but I think, as Fran pointed out, someone as fragile as him, my God, can you imagine, what drugs he would have gotten into and what a fragile state of mind he could have gone into with Flame as well. So yeah, but yeah, very, very sad. just very sad.
So we asked a question, Babs.
So I definitely think he's underrated in pop culture, right? So the fact that I know his name but nothing else, as a music fan, okay, not a folk music fan, I think is bizarre. He clearly influenced so many people. When I was looking at Kate Bush, Paul Weller, Black Crowes, R.E.M., The Cure, that's a big list of people that he's influenced, which is kind of amazing for someone who sold as few records as he did in his time. But when I went to look at the Spotify statistics, he has hang on, oh God, my that's popped up. He's got almost 2.5 million monthly listeners. That is a fuck ton. And Pink Moon has 130 million listens. Like, that's big numbers. So I think he's not underrated in terms of fans. Like, he seems absolutely fairly rated in terms of fans. But I do think, like, the man is more than the music. Like, yeah, people, I'm sure there are other people like me out there who have heard of Nick Drake but don't know anything about him or what he sounds like, which is a shame, because they absolutely should. I think any folk playlist that convinces me that someone is good is rare. So that's it. Yeah, I'm kind of sitting on the fence, like not quite underrated culturally. Underrated culturally, but not maybe musically.
Yeah, if we're going purely for music, so like, yeah, for the past 20 years, he's always an artist that everyone's saying, oh, he's underrated. So maybe for me, he's an overrated, underrated artist, if that's a thing.
No. Okay, we're moving to new categorizations today. Okay.
So yeah, he's probably got half a dozen songs I really, really like, but over the 3 albums, yeah, I would struggle to maybe feel more than that. So yeah, I can't really say that he's that underrated. And now you've given me the stats that he's got millions of plays, so people do kind of know him.
I think probably because, right, it's 3 albums, as you said. Like, if you get into him, it's really not much to. Yeah, I mean, let me go and look at Jeff Buckley's statistics. Because Jeff Buckley, there is a lot of kind of live albums. But yeah, so Jeff Buckley has similar 2.8 million, and Hallelujah up the top with 296 million, much bigger. So yeah.
And again, people will still say, "Oh, he's underrated." There's people who will clutch Jeff Buckley as if he's their own personal artist they found.
I mean, I remember at school there was a girl who was really into Jeff Buckley. She was like the first person I saw get a musical related tattoo. She had like his lyrics tattooed on her ankle when she was like 16. And I think about her and I'm like, does she regret that? I don't know.
And just to say, I think that, again, chimes with what we were saying about the romanticization of the, artist who burned out and died young. And, that's enhancing this. So you're certainly not underrated by the fans of, that know your music, because actually you're, idolized and you've become a sort of icon for, Nick Drake has become an icon like Jeff Buckley and Ian Curtis have for a certain type of, doomed romantic musician, romantic artist.
But let's not buy like that Joy Division fan who bought the plot of land next to his grave so that I think maybe killed herself to be buried next to him. Let's not go there, guys. I think it's very human to romanticize this, but let's keep it in check.
Does Elliott Smith get a similar vibe?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know any of his music. Maybe actually I've heard more, but yeah.
Yeah, and then bands like associated with the artists who Jim Morrison and Jimi Hendrix, the old 27 Club. Nirvana only have 3. Was it only 3 studio albums?
Yeah.
But then their cultural impact is by many orders of magnitude higher than Nick Drake's 3 albums.
Can I ask a quick question regarding Nirvana? Do you prefer the cover to the Bowie song, or do you prefer Bowie's? I prefer Nirvana, but
I'm gonna give you guys some homework.
Or Lulu.
Lulu, yeah. Oh, you know it. I was gonna say the Lulu version is the one that I love the most.
That is not what I expected to come.
Well,
next.
I guess Nirvana in some ways saved that song. So for a long time, people in the UK knew it from Lulu, and then Nirvana came along and went, "Oh, this is now a cool song again."
I think the Lulu version's cool. I think they were having an affair at the time, and Bowie produced it as well. Bowie's
Wow.
Naughty Bowie.
Facts at the end. There we go. I forgot to ask you about this in advance, Tom, but is there anything you'd like to plug? If not, I have an idea for you, because your brother is a musician, right? So we might want to plug his work.
I suddenly temporarily panicked then. I was like, I don't have any music. What do you mean?
That's why I was like, don't worry, I've got a solution.
I was thinking you might want me to plug one of the TV shows that I work on.
I mean, you can. I mean, you have a very interesting job if you want to talk about it. Okay, that's not what I was thinking.
Yeah,
but there we go.
Chase definitely needs us to plug it.
Yeah. Is that over or underrated in your opinion, The Chase? Yeah, so to plug, I should plug my brother's music, shouldn't I? Which I'm not prepared to do.
All right. Well,
so
anyway,
film for me while I do.
So Tom's brother Jack Haigh is a full-time musician, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, and he's a singer-songwriter, acoustic guitar. He's not.
But his music isn't. He's a fucking genius. Like I have to say, like the type of music that he makes again isn't automatically my kind of music because it's acoustic guitar, but the way that he plays the guitar is seriously impressive. He is very accomplished.
Technically, it's really interesting. He sort of uses the guitar as like a percussive instrument as well as like a melodic instrument. By sort of he used to have scratch boards and he'd do tapping and finger style and stuff like that. I think he's more varied now, but doesn't just do that. But yeah, Jack Haigh Music is his handle on Instagram.
And Haigh is Haigh.
That's right. Yeah, he's on. His music's on YouTube as well as Instagram, and I think it's on Spotify.
Fran, any final thoughts?
Final thoughts. It's great that we are still all alive and well, and we're enjoying our own English parts of the world.
There is something quite human and beautiful of, finding solace in people who are having a harder time than you. But yeah, just make sure that doesn't take over your life, and you seek out help if you have mental health problems. And it's like, bringing it back to, it's such a shame that Nick Drake felt ashamed to take antidepressants. Guys, like, some of us aren't here on medication. I am for ADHD. Like, don't be ashamed. Be grateful that we're in the 21st century and it's easy to talk about this stuff. So there we go. Bye.
And there we go. That was our British singer-songwriter stroke 70s episode. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed that, why don't you like and subscribe and review, because that all helps us. And if you want to ask us about anything to do with the podcast or recommend any artists or guests, please get in touch on Twitter at OUMusicPod, on Instagram at over_musicpod, and you can also find us on YouTube or email us on over_musicpod@gmail.com. Thanks again, and bye-bye.